Hey everybody, welcome to session 3.10 where we talk about asset management for nonprofit organizations. And what we really are going to be talking about are these three topics, endowments and how to manage them effectively, physical property, and then intellectual property and how to manage each of these. So let's talk about endowments first. When a nonprofit has an endowment, what it basically has is a very large set of invested assets. So they might be investments like stock in companies, it might be bonds, corporate or municipal bonds, it might even be real estate, especially if that real estate is income producing, like with rent. And so what happens is a large donor says, "Hey, we're going to give you this big chunk of valuable assets, and they're going to be an endowment for you." And then what happens with the endowment is it grows over time, and the nonprofit uses the growth of the endowment to fund its activities. So a few terms to keep in mind about endowments. First of all, the original gifted amount is often called the principal, or it might be called the corpus, but it's essentially that original gifted amount. So if you had a $10 million donation in the form of an endowment, then that $10 million is the principal or corpus. That money is often restricted. A very common restriction with endowments is that you can't spend down the actual corpus. So you can let the 10 million grow over time and then use the growth of that investment to do your nonprofit activities, but you can't dip into the $10 million or dip below $10 million to operate. Then what happens with endowments is one of two, or even both of these two things. As the endowment grows, it can create income. So you might sell stock that went up in value, for example, or the stock might have kicked off a dividend. If it was real estate that generated rental income, that'd be another example of income. So as the endowment grows or generates income, you take that growth or that income from the endowment and then you use it in two ways. You might use it for your operations. So let's say you have a $10 million endowment and you got $500,000 that came out of the growth or income of that endowment. And you could use the $500,000 to operate your nonprofit. Or if you don't need the full amount, let's say you only wanted to use $400,000 for operations, you could take that remaining $100,000 and put it back into the endowment so that it continues to grow. And so this is how organizations manage their endowments. Now it's going to be financial professionals that do the actual asset, like do actually manage the financial assets. So and that will be overseen by the board of directors. So the board of directors will decide, for example, how much income that's coming out of the endowment goes towards operations, but then they do that with advice from financial managers. And the financial managers might say, you know what, the stock market's probably going to be going down in the near future, so you should take out less than you might normally take out, for example. And then obviously what the board decides to do with an endowment is going to be subject to any donor restrictions that were put in place to begin with. Endowment payouts are usually based on multi-year averages of performance instead of just a single year. And the reason is because an endowment might grow a lot in one year and then shrink in the following year because of a stock market correction. And so what a lot of nonprofits will do is they'll calculate their endowment payouts as a multi-year average to kind of smooth out the ups and downs from one year to the next. And then if you hear the term underwater being applied to an endowment, it usually means that the endowment has either fallen below its original value or some other benchmark. And for an endowment to be underwater typically means that it's not going to be paying out, or at least it would be paying out a lot less. Foundations that have their endowment shrink quite a bit, for example, their grant making shrinks quite a bit. And so if you hear the term underwater being used to talk about an endowment, this is what it usually means. So let me know what questions you have about endowments when we get to class. Let's talk a little bit about physical property. So here we're talking about real estate, about office equipment or computers, about vehicles that you use for your organization. So anything that's physical like this is what we're going to be talking about. And managing physical property is really about risk management. It's about thinking about how the property might lose its value or be destroyed, or how other people might be negatively affected by the way the property is being managed. And so here's some questions you ask when you're engaging in good property management. One, you ask if people are safe. Your property, might be poorly maintained, and because of it, it might become dangerous to somebody else. This would be like having a car, a company car or nonprofit car that hasn't had the brakes checked in a long time. And so most national organizations, by the way, have safety guidelines for their chapters. So Boys and Girls Clubs, Make-A-Wish, others, they actually have safety requirements for all their chapter members. Because this is an important part of operating the organization. You ask yourself if the property is well maintained. Property maintenance is a skilled profession, and it's a full-time job for many people to be property managers. And it's not just about real estate, but it's about buildings and the other facilities, or fleets of cars or trucks, like all these sorts of things. And so it's good to have help from professionals who know and understand how to effectively maintain property over time. Is your property insured? And insurance, by the way, is not just about insuring against the loss of the property itself, like having fire insurance on your building, but it's also to protect you against claims that other people might make against you because they got injured on your property. And so talk to an insurance agent to make sure you're properly insured, both against the loss of the property, but also against lawsuits that might come because people were injured because of your property. Ask yourself if you're complying with the law. There are a lot of laws that limit how organizations manage their property. Zoning laws, for example, affect what you can do with your real estate. You can't just do whatever you want in most cities on any piece of property. There are limits depending on what the zoning of that piece of property includes. OSHA laws, for example, limit how safety issues relative to your physical property. You have to create a safe work environment. And so in these ways, it's good to get help from a lawyer. Finally, on the last question, are you keeping track of your property? Large organizations have a huge amount of physical property to pay attention to. Office equipment, fleets of vehicles, all these sorts of things we've been talking about up to this point. And there are property tracking systems out there that help you make sure that you're keeping track of everything, like access to property, for example, like key cards to get in and out of your building, a maintenance history and projected maintenance requirements, so you know what needs maintenance when, so you can stay on track that way. And then also this helps you make sure you're doing the right accounting, because the value of a piece of property changes over time, and its value is affected by all the other things that we've talked about. So those are the basics of property management. It's, like I said, it's mostly about risk management, and these are the questions that you can ask yourself. This is a pretty handy checklist, actually. So let's wrap up by talking about intellectual property. Intellectual property is property that doesn't necessarily exist in a physical form. There are 4 different kinds of it, and then we're going to talk through these 4 kinds. The first kind of intellectual property I want to talk about is a trade secret. This is any process, method, plan, or formula, or other information that you keep secret that helps you run your organization. The quintessential example of this in the nonprofit space is a donor list, a list of all the people who have given, what they've given, or like a list of potential donors, people you've been prospecting and working with or reaching out to, or that you might be reaching out to. Nonprofits usually keep donor information pretty secret. They treat it as a trade secret because they don't want to just hand out their donor list to all the other competing nonprofits out there. And you have to maintain and protect your trade secrets, because if you don't, you'll lose them. And so you have, for example, people sign a non-disclosure agreement. So if they get access to the trade secret information, they promise not to share it with other people. You have internal controls to make sure people don't get access. So if it's printed out, you keep it in a locked filing cabinet. If it's on a computer, you password protect it. You have to maintain these internal controls to make sure only the right people have access to the trade secrets. And then finally, you need to be willing to sue people. If your trade secrets are misappropriated or used improperly, you got to bring a lawsuit to maintain legal protection of them. And that's it on trade secrets. I'll answer questions, obviously, about these in class. Let's talk about copyright next. Copyright is any time you create what's called a fixed expression. And so an example of a fixed expression would be writing a piece of music, painting a painting, but even something as mundane as writing an email can count as a fixed expression. So it can't be just ideas. It has to be, fixed in some sort of medium, and that can be in a computer's digital files or on a canvas or on a tape recording or whatever. But once that fixed expression has been created, a copyright has been created. You don't have to file copyrights with the U.S. Copyright Office. You don't have to register a copyright. You can if you want to, because it gives you sort of extra legal power if you have to sue somebody for violating your copyright. But copyrights exist as soon as a fixed expression has been created. And once you create it, you now have ownership of this fixed expression, and you're the one who gets to decide whether or not copies of it are made, whether or not it's published somewhere, whether or not it's performed, like if it's a piece of music you wrote or a dance that you choreographed. These are examples of ways that you get to protect your copyright, is deciding how it's used in these ways. You can also sell the right or give away the right to somebody else to use your copyrighted material. And that's done through what's called a license. So you can give somebody or sell somebody a copyright license. If you want to use somebody else's copyrighted material, you have to get a license from them. The limited exception to that is in what's called fair use, where you have a legal right to use it according to certain restrictions. For example, it has to be non-commercial. You might get to use it, make copies of it if it's satire because you're making fun of it. And so there are some limited free speech, fair use rights that you have to use somebody else's copyrighted material. But if you use it without a license and without fair use, then the person can sue you for violating their copyright. All right, let's talk about patents. A patent exists when you invent a thing, and it can be an object, a process, a recipe, or design. And when you do that, you get this exclusive right to produce the thing or use it or whatever. So patents have to be reduced to practice, meaning they have to actually be created. They can't just be pure ideas in somebody's head. And then you get a patent by filing with the U.S. Patent Office. And so that's how patents are created, is by getting the patent office to grant you a patent. Nonprofits use patents. Universities, for example, are nonprofits, and they do a lot of scientific research that gets patented, and then they sell or license those patents to others so that they can use them. BYU built an entire building. The life sciences building was built because of a patent lawsuit against a pharmaceutical company using a technology that a BYU professor had invented. Okay, and then finally, let's talk about trademarks. A trademark is when you have the exclusive right to words or a symbol that indicates a source of a product or service. So Coca-Cola, for example, is the trademark for their particular brand of soda. I can't make a cola and then call it Coca-Cola, so I get sued into oblivion. So it's an indicator of source, meaning it shows what specific company or seller or provider is the source of that product. Frito-Lay, makes Doritos, and I can't sell chips named Doritos. Nonprofits use trademarks because, Boys and Girls Club does this. So if you want to operate a Boys and Girls Club, you have to get the right to use the Boys and Girls Club trademark, which is owned by the national organization. Trademarks are really valuable. The way you get a trademark is, you can get what's called a common law trademark, which means you just use the name, but it's harder to protect those. The way you protect them with a lot more legal power is you register your trademark with the U.S. Trademark Office, and then you renew it every 5 years, but you can keep a trademark going forever. Okay, we'll talk about these questions about intellectual property and other topics in class. See you then.